say, no! We're not gonna eat this dreck anymore!
In 1972, while America was still divided by war and distrust of its own institutions, a television series quietly slipped onto prime time that had no business surviving. It was a comedy set in a war zone. Surgeons joked over open bodies. Authority was mocked. Patriotism was questioned. Network executives feared backlash. Advertisers hesitated. Viewers didn't know whether to laugh or change the channel. And yet, week after week, this unlikely show refused to die. Because beneath the punchlines was something far more dangerous than satire. It was truth. It dared to suggest that war wasn't glorious, that heroes were flawed, and that survival sometimes meant clinging to humor in the face of horror. That gamble could have destroyed careers overnight. Instead, it built a legacy that still echoes decades later. But what happened behind the cameras was even more volatile than what aired on screen. 1. The finale that broke America. The final episode of MASH Times was not designed to comfort, it was designed to confront. More than 100 million viewers tuned in, expecting nostalgia. Instead, they witnessed Hawkeye unravel under the weight of suppressed trauma. A comedy about war ended with psychological devastation, forcing audiences to sit in silence rather than laughter. That choice elevated the series from popular entertainment to cultural milestone. It proved that, television, even at its most beloved, could demand emotional accountability instead of offering easy closure. 2. Alan Alda's quiet takeover. As seasons progressed, Alan Alda's presence extended beyond acting. He wrote scripts, directed episodes, and gradually shaped the philosophical tone of the series. What began as ensemble satire evolved into character-driven reflection, often centered on Hawkeye's moral perspective. Some colleagues admired the clarity of his vision, others felt the balance shifting. The change deepened the show's emotional complexity, but it also altered its original anarchic spirit. Creative authority, once shared, became increasingly concentrated. 3. The death that shocked a nation. When Henry Blake's plane was shot down, sitcom history shifted instantly. Television rarely allowed permanent loss, especially in comedy. The announcement scene was understated and devastating, leaving characters and viewers stunned. The decision signaled that this series would not shield its audience from war's reality. Laughter would coexist with mortality, not replace it. That moment transformed MASH Times from clever satire into something braver and far more enduring. 4. A show nearly canceled before it began. In its first weeks, MASH Times looked like a mistake. Ratings were weak, affiliates nervous, and executives at CBS questioned whether viewers wanted satire about war, while Vietnam still dominated headlines. Letters accused the series of being cynical and unpatriotic. Cancellation was discussed seriously before the first season had time to breathe. What saved it wasn't instant popularity, but strategic patience. A shift in scheduling placed the show after stronger programming, giving audiences time to discover its intelligence. Word of mouth slowly replaced doubt. The near-death experience hardened the writer's resolve and sharpened the show's fearless tone. 5. On-screen friendship, off-screen friction. Hawkeye and Radar radiated warmth that felt effortless, anchoring the early emotional core of the series. Behind the scenes, however, the working relationship between Alan Alda and Gary Berghoff was far from harmonious. Creative differences, clashing temperaments, and unspoken competition created a steady undercurrent of tension. Rehearsals remained professional, but distance lingered beyond the camera's frame. That friction sometimes heightened performances, giving scenes a subtle edge viewers couldn't quite name. Over time, the strain accumulated. By the later seasons, exhaustion replaced camaraderie, and Berghoff's eventual departure reflected years of pressure that audiences never fully saw. 6. Addiction in the shadows. Radar O'Reilly embodied innocence in a world drenched in chaos. Off-screen, Gary Berghoff struggled under the weight of fame, long production schedules, and mounting personal stress. Fatigue began to show. Rehearsals grew more difficult. The tight rhythm that once defined his performance required greater effort. Public explanations framed his exit as a desire for family life, but those close to the production recognized deeper strain. Hollywood rarely pauses for vulnerability. The schedule moves forward regardless. When Radar left, the camp lost its emotional compass. The series continued, but a quiet softness vanished with him. 7. Contracts that felt like cages. Loretta Swit's evolution as Margaret Houlihan marked one of the show's strongest character arcs. What began as caricature matured into complexity, yet behind that growth was frustration. Film opportunities appeared and disappeared because television contracts restricted outside work. Stability came at the cost of flexibility. Swit honored her commitment, delivering layered performances through the finale. Still, the unmade films lingered as quiet regrets. The system that protected the show's consistency limited individual autonomy. That tension mirrored the very institution the series critiqued. Loyalty demanded sacrifice. 8. The Laugh Track War. Few decisions irritated the creative team more than the imposed laugh track. Producers argued that viewers didn't need cues to understand irony. Network research insisted otherwise. The compromise, no canned laughter in operating room scenes, felt partial at best. When episodes later aired without it, audiences discovered a leaner, more sophisticated tone. The laughter had often softened moments that deserved silence. The struggle over that track reflected a larger debate about audience intelligence. The series thrived not because of the laughter, but in spite of it. 9. A real surgeon behind the scalpel. Medical authenticity grounded the chaos. The show's advisor, a former MASH surgeon from Korea, infused scripts with lived experience. His stories shaped operating room dialogue and moral dilemmas. Actors were trained to move like professionals, not performers mimicking procedure. That realism gave the series credibility that satire alone could not sustain. Beneath the humor was the weight of someone who had actually stood in a surgical tent. The blood on screen carried memory, not just stagecraft. 10. The blood budget. Network television in the 1970s rarely lingered on gore. MASH times did. Gallons of stage blood were used each season to keep war from appearing sanitized. Censors pushed back. Producers held firm. The operating room became a visual reminder that every joke existed against a backdrop of human cost. It wasn't exploitation, it was confrontation. That insistence distinguished the series from lighter contemporaries and anchored its moral authority. 11. The anti-war tightrope. The show's anti-war stance intensified as seasons progressed. Conservative groups criticized it as subversive. Military cooperation faded, yet veterans wrote letters praising its honesty. The series walked a narrow line between satire and statement. It refused propaganda. It refused romanticism. That refusal granted it longevity. Audiences sensed sincerity beneath the jokes. The political heat never fully cooled, but it validated the show's courage. 12. The timeline that made no sense. 11 seasons portrayed a 3-year war. Christmas came repeatedly. Characters aged inconsistently. Writers prioritized story over chronology. Continuity bent under creative ambition. Viewers largely accepted it because emotional truth mattered more than calendar precision. The war felt endless, perhaps unintentionally echoing how conflict lingers in memory long after dates fade. 13. A reluctant colonel. Harry Morgan initially resisted joining as Colonel Potter. He worried about ensemble politics and long commitments. When he accepted, he approached cautiously. That caution evolved into warmth. Potter's steady presence stabilized later seasons. What began as reluctance matured into legacy. Sometimes the roles actors hesitate to accept define them most completely. 14. Writers left behind. While cast members prospered from syndication wealth, many writers received minimal residual compensation. Contracts of the era favored studios and performers. The imbalance fueled later industry reforms. The irony lingered. A show critiquing institutional inequity reflected it within its own production model. 15. A comedy that refused to stay light. At its core, MASH times endured because it refused to simplify war. It laughed, but it never trivialized. It entertained, but it insisted on reflection. Each internal conflict, creative control, contract disputes, addiction struggles mirrored the instability it portrayed on screen. The 4077th was fiction, yet the tensions were real. That authenticity resonates with viewers who have lived long enough to recognize complexity. In the end, the lesson is clear. Longevity in art comes from risk, not safety. MASH times survived because it trusted audiences to handle discomfort. It challenged institutions, questioned authority, and embraced imperfection. For those who watched it in real time, it was more than a series. It was a companion through turbulent years. And decades later, its message still holds. Humor may help us endure chaos, but honesty is what gives that endurance meaning. MASH times endures because it refused to lie. It proved that comedy does not weaken truth, it can sharpen it. By blending satire with sorrow, laughter with loss, the series trusted its audience to handle moral complexity. It showed that institutions can be questioned, authority can be challenged, and humanity can survive even in chaos. The battles behind the camera mirrored the tensions on screen, reminding us that meaningful art is rarely born from comfort. Its legacy is not just record-breaking ratings or iconic characters, but courage, the courage to evolve, to risk controversy, and to end honestly. If this deep dive gave you new insight into a show you thought you already knew, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who remembers the 4077th, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that uncover the real history behind classic television.